The Al-Masari palace glittered that night, alive with music, perfume, and the clinking of crystal glasses. Beneath golden chandeliers, the Arab millionaire Sheikh Rami Al-Masari basked in the attention of his wealthy guests. His arrogance was legend, so was his taste for humiliating those beneath him. As the orchestra struck a bold tango rhythm, elegant couples glided across the marble floor. Rami, leaning on his cane in a white silk suit, watched with a cruel smirk. Then his eyes caught a young waitress weaving quietly between tables, balancing a tray of drinks. Her name was Zahara, a dark-skinned girl with quiet dignity, carrying burdens far heavier than trays. Rami raised his voice, making sure every guest could hear. "You there," he barked, pointing his cane. The music slowed, and eyes turned. "If you can dance tango with me, and not trip like a fool, I will make you my bride." The room exploded in laughter. A servant? His bride? She can't even walk in those shoes. Mockery rippled like fire. Zahara's face flushed, her hands trembling. For years she had swallowed insults, endured poverty, worked nights to buy medicine for her sick mother. But this insult cut sharper than all, and yet, somewhere deep inside, a spark flickered. She remembered her late father, spinning her gently in their tiny broken home, guiding her bare feet over cracked tiles to the beat of tango playing from a battered radio. "Zahara," he had whispered, "dance as if the world is yours." The orchestra hesitated, waiting. Rami leaned back, smug, expecting her to flee. But slowly, Zahara set her tray down. She raised her chin, her eyes burning with quiet defiance. "If it's a dance you want," she said firmly, "then it's a dance you shall have." The ballroom gasped. The laughter died. Even Rami's smirk faltered. Because in that moment, every guest could see it. This was not a servant about to be mocked. This was a storm about to be unleashed. The orchestra hesitated, bowstrings frozen mid-air, as every guest turned to watch. Zahara stepped forward, her waitress uniform looking painfully out of place beneath the golden chandeliers. But her eyes, steady, fearless, held something the silks and jewels around her could never buy: dignity. Sheikh Rami leaned back in his chair, his jeweled cane tapping against the marble floor. "Very well," he said with a mocking bow of his head. "Show us, little servant. Show us how a waitress tangos." Laughter rippled through the crowd again, though softer this time, uneasy. Zahara ignored them all. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, letting the rhythm of the tango sink into her bones, just as her father had taught her years ago. The violins rose, and Zahara moved. Her first step was smooth, deliberate, her foot sliding across the marble as if the floor itself welcomed her. Her body followed with flawless rhythm, her arms shaping invisible lines in the air. It wasn't just dancing, it was storytelling. Pain, struggle, hope, all woven into movement. The laughter died instantly. Mouths fell open. Guests leaned forward in disbelief. Rami's smug smile faltered. His eyes narrowed as he watched her glide, turn, and snap into perfect form. This wasn't clumsy improvisation. This was mastery. Every spin, every pause, every flick of her heel carried a weight that silenced the room. A woman mocked as a servant was suddenly commanding the ballroom like a queen. By the time she ended her first sequence, head high, eyes locked on Rami, the orchestra itself was trembling, the musicians caught in her spell. For the first time in years, Sheikh Rami Al-Masari felt something he was unaccustomed to in his own palace. He felt small. The silence in the ballroom was deafening. Zahara stood tall at the center of the marble floor, her chest rising and falling, her eyes blazing like fire. She had danced alone, but it felt as though she had commanded the very soul of tango itself. Guests whispered to one another, disbelief etched into their jeweled faces. Where did she learn this? A waitress? Impossible, but one voice cut through the murmurs. Sheikh Rami's. He slammed his cane against the floor, the sound echoing like thunder. Enough. He rose slowly from his chair, his silk robes flowing, his presence heavy with power. His smirk returned, though thinner now, edged with irritation. A performance, yes. But tango is not meant to be danced alone. He extended a hand toward Zahara, his ring glittering under the chandelier. "Dance with me, if you dare." The crowd gasped. Some cheered, others whispered warnings. This was no longer mockery. This was challenge. Zahara's gaze didn't falter. She stepped forward, placing her hand in his. Her touch was firm, not timid, not servile. For the first time, someone dared to look Sheikh Rami in the eye as an equal. The orchestra struck again, the tango swelling like a heartbeat. Rami led with force, his steps sharp, confident. But Zahara didn't follow like the others had. She matched him. Every time he tried to dominate, she countered with perfect grace, her footwork quicksilver, her body a language he could not command. The guests leaned closer, their laughter gone, replaced with awe. This wasn't a rich man humiliating a servant. This was a duel. And with every turn, every snap, every flick of Zahara's heel, it was becoming clearer. The sheikh was not leading this dance. He was being led by a waitress. The violins surged, sharper, faster. The floor became a battlefield, and every eye in the ballroom was locked on the unlikely pair. Sheikh Rami Al-Masari, the feared millionaire, and Zahara, the waitress he had mocked only minutes ago. Rami's jaw tightened. His pride, his reputation, his power, everything felt at stake. He gripped Zahara's waist firmly, forcing his steps with authority. His cane had been cast aside. Now he moved like a predator, determined to prove he was still in control. But Zahara didn't bend. She flowed like water, spinning out of his grip, snapping back into the rhythm with elegance that made his forced strength look clumsy. Her movements carried precision, not arrogance, confidence, not cruelty. The guests were stunned. Their whispers turned into gasps as the balance of power shifted visibly on the dance floor. Rami lunged, pulling Zahara into a dramatic dip, expecting to stun the audience with dominance. But Zahara twisted gracefully, reclaiming the movement, and dipped him. Instead, his body bent awkwardly, his face inches from the marble floor. The crowd erupted, some clapping, others covering their mouths in disbelief. A murmur rose. "She's controlling the dance." Rami's face burned red. His breath came heavier. No one had ever dared make him look weak. Not in his home, not in his world. Yet here he was, being dismantled in front of princes, businessmen, and dignitaries by a servant. Still, Zahara's expression wasn't mocking. It was steady, calm, almost compassionate. She wasn't trying to humiliate him. She was simply showing a truth too powerful. To be denied, skill, grace, and spirit cannot be bought with money. And the ballroom, once filled with cruel laughter, now stood in reverent silence. For the first time, Sheikh Rami realized the danger wasn't that Zahara might embarrass him. The danger was that she was stealing his stage, his authority, his very crown, without uttering a single word. The orchestra swelled, violins slicing the air, drums pounding like a racing heart. Every guest leaned forward, unable to look away from the storm brewing on the dance floor. Sheikh Rami's eyes burned with desperation now. Sweat glistened on his brow as he tried harder, faster, every spin, every stomp, every attempt to dominate the rhythm. But each move he forced only made his flaws clearer. Zahara, by contrast, glided like she was born to the music. Her steps were fluid, her posture regal, her timing flawless. She wasn't just dancing with the music. She was the music. Gasps echoed as she spun out of his grip again, her skirt flowing like fire, then snapped back, circling him with a confidence that turned the millionaire into her shadow. "Unbelievable," whispered one guest. "She's outdancing him," said another. Rami clenched his jaw. This was his palace, his night, his name on everyone's lips. Yet here he was, being reduced, step by step, into the background of his own stage. Then came the climax. Rami lunged forward in one last desperate attempt to seize control, pulling Zahara close with enough force to make her stumble. The crowd gasped. Perhaps now, finally, he would regain his pride. But Zahara didn't falter. With lightning precision, she pivoted, spun, and reversed the move, sending the millionaire into a stumble so awkward, he nearly crashed to the floor. She caught him at the last second, holding him upright as though she were saving him. The entire ballroom froze. For a moment, there was silence. Then, applause. Slow at first, then rising into thunderous claps and cheers. Not for the sheikh. For Zahara. Rami's face drained of color. His chest heaved. and as the final note of the tango cut through the air, he realized the unthinkable. In front of the richest, most powerful men and women of Dubai, he had been defeated by the very girl he tried to humiliate. The ballroom thundered with applause, echoing beneath the gilded arches. The clapping was not polite, it was fierce, alive, the kind of applause reserved for legends. Zahara stood tall at the center, chest heaving, eyes ablaze. She bowed slightly, her face glowing with quiet pride. For a single night, she was no servant, she was a queen commanding her court. But Sheikh Rami, he froze in place, his pride collapsing with each clap. The praise that should have been his burned against his skin like fire. The man who lived for control now stood exposed, humiliated, overshadowed by the very girl he'd mocked. Some guests whispered behind jeweled hands, "Unbelievable. She moves like she's trained for years. She made him stumble. Did you see that?" Rami's face twisted with fury. He slammed his cane onto the floor, silencing the orchestra with a single command. The clapping softened, but the murmurs did not stop. "Enough," he barked, his voice booming. This girl is a waitress, nothing more. Do not insult me with your applause for a servant's parlor trick." The guests shifted uneasily. A few lowered their eyes, but most continued stealing glances at Zahara, admiration in their faces. Zahara lifted her chin. "With respect, Sheikh," she said calmly, "you asked me to dance, and I did. I did not dance for humiliation. I danced because I could. Because my father taught me that grace and dignity belong to anyone brave enough to claim them." The words struck like a blade. The silence that followed was heavier than any insult. Rami's hand trembled around his cane. His pride demanded he crush her here, now, before her victory spread beyond these walls. But even as his anger boiled, a shadow of doubt crept into his eyes. Because in Zahara's poise, in her strength, he saw something he hadn't expected, something money could not buy, and power could not command. And it terrified him. The ballroom still hummed with whispers, the air heavy with Zahara's unexpected triumph. Sheikh Rami's grip on his jeweled cane tightened until his knuckles whitened. His empire of pride, built on fear and mockery, had cracked before his very guests. He could not allow it. Not here. Not tonight. Slowly he raised his head, forcing a thin smile across his lips. "Impressive," he said, his voice strained but steady. "Truly, you dance better than most, but—" He let the word hang like a dagger. Any street performer can mimic steps. To stand among the elite, to be worthy of a promise like mine, you must prove more than rhythm. The guests leaned closer, intrigued. Some exchanged uneasy glances. "Another test?" Zahara met his gaze without flinching. "And what is it you want now, Sheikh?" Rami's smirk returned, though his eyes betrayed the storm beneath. He gestured toward the grand piano at the edge of the hall. Its polished surface gleamed under the chandeliers. "Play," he ordered. "If your hands are as skilled as your feet, then perhaps, you are not just a waitress pretending to be something greater." The crowd gasped. "A piano?" whispered one guest. "This is madness. She's just a servant." Rami leaned back into his velvet chair, confident once again. "Or are you afraid? Admit it, girl, you were lucky once, but luck dies quickly under true challenge." All eyes turned to Zahara. Her pulse quickened. She had touched a piano only once in her life, long ago in a community center, where her father had taken her after work. She remembered his words as he pressed her small hands onto the keys. "Music, like dance, is freedom. Even if the world denies you everything, let no one deny your song." Her hands trembled as she stepped forward. She could almost hear his voice again. Then Zahara placed her fingers on the keys. The ballroom held its breath, and with a deep exhale, she began to play. The first notes trembled, fragile as if they might shatter under the weight of so many eyes. Some of the guests smirked, whispering under their breaths, already preparing for her failure. But then, something shifted. Zahara's fingers found rhythm, not of trained perfection, but of raw emotion. The piano came alive, pouring sorrow and longing into every note. The hall fell silent. What began as hesitant grew into a storm, low, deep chords rumbling like buried pain, then soaring melodies lifting like wings. Zahara wasn't just playing, she was telling her story. The story of a girl who had scrubbed dishes until her hands bled. The story of a daughter who had lost her father too young, but never his lessons. The story of a woman who refused to bow, even when mocked by wealth and power. Tears glistened in the eyes of women in jewels and silks. A hardened businessman in the front row clenched his jaw, his chest tight. Even the servants at the edges of the room stood straighter, pride swelling in their hearts. And Sheikh Rami? He sat frozen. The arrogance on his face melted into something unfamiliar, regret, perhaps even admiration. The notes clawed at walls he had built inside himself, walls of pride, cruelty, and loneliness. When the final chord rang out, echoing into silence, Zahara lifted her hands slowly from the keys. Her chest rose and fell, but her eyes never left Rami's. The ballroom erupted into applause. Wild, unstoppable. Guests stood to their feet. Women waved their fans to hide their tears. Men clapped until their palms turned red. But Rami did not clap. Instead, he whispered to himself, too low for most to hear, impossible. She carries the soul of an artist. Zahara stood, unshaken, her voice steady. You see, Sheikh, wealth can buy teachers, palaces, and instruments, but it cannot buy passion. And passion is what makes art eternal. For the first time that night, Rami had no retort, no insult, no laughter, only silence. The applause still thundered across the ballroom, but inside Sheikh Rami's chest, there was only chaos. For years he had mocked, commanded, humiliated, and no one had dared challenge him. Yet here was Zahara, a waitress with calloused hands, standing taller than the richest lords in the room. He rose from his chair, his cape-like bisht flowing behind him as he stepped forward. The crowd fell into a hush, waiting for his verdict. Well played, he said slowly, his deep voice carrying through the hall. But music is not enough. Anyone can memorize notes. You spoke of passion. His eyes narrowed. Now prove it. The orchestra behind him stirred nervously as Rami clapped his hands. The musicians lifted their instruments, and suddenly, the haunting strains of a tango filled the room. Gasps swept across the audience. Tango, someone whispered. She cannot. She is only a servant girl, another murmured. But Rami was not finished. He extended a hand toward Zahara, his smirk returning, though weaker, as if hiding doubt. Dance with me, here, now, before them all. If you falter even once, you will crawl out of this palace on your knees, and your name will be forgotten. The silence was suffocating. The stakes were no longer about pride, it was humiliation or glory. Zahara's heart raced. Her father's lessons echoed in her mind. Tango is not steps. Tango is fire. If you carry fire in your soul, the world will feel it, even without training. Her lips curled into a small, defiant smile. Fine, she said. But remember this, Sheikh. If I succeed, you will never mock a woman's worth again. The crowd gasped. No one had ever spoken to Rami that way. He extended his hand again, and this time, Zahara placed hers in his. The music swelled. The world seemed to hold its breath. A waitress and a billionaire stepped into the center of the ballroom, where destiny would be decided with a single dance. The orchestra struck a bold chord, and the tango began. Sheikh Rami pulled Zahara close, expecting her to stumble, to falter, to reveal herself as an imposter. But instead, her body moved with perfect confidence. Her steps were sharp yet graceful, her turns filled with fire. The crowd gasped. Every movement was a battle, Rami's arrogance against Zahara's defiance. He tried to dominate, to lead with crushing force, but Zahara matched him step for step, her gaze burning into his. When he spun her, she spun faster. When he tried to break her rhythm, she countered with elegance. It was no longer a dance. It was a war. And slowly, Rami realized he was losing. The guests were mesmerized. They weren't watching a servant and a billionaire anymore. They were watching two equals, locked in a duel of passion and pride. Finally, as the music reached its climax, Zahara broke free from Rami's grip. With a powerful final spin, she ended the dance alone, her chin high, her hand outstretched, not as a follower, but as a conqueror. The ballroom erupted in thunderous applause. Men cheered, women shouted her name. Servants wept openly, their pride swelling as if Zahara had danced for them all. And Sheikh Rami? For the first time in his life, the man who mocked the poor, who laughed at weakness, who thought money could buy anything, dropped to one knee before a woman who had nothing but courage. "Enough," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You have won. Not just this dance, but my respect." The guests gasped. Some even clutched their pearls. A billionaire kneeling to a waitress? Unthinkable. But Zahara didn't smile in victory. Instead, she bent down and said softly, "I did not dance for your promise of marriage, Sheikh. I danced to prove that dignity cannot be bought or mocked. Remember that, the next time you look down on someone who serves you." Rami lowered his head, ashamed. For the first time he saw himself clearly, lonely, arrogant, and small compared to the fire in this woman's spirit. The orchestra ended, the applause continued, and Zahara walked away, not as a servant, but as a queen in her own right. True worth is never measured in wealth, titles, or power. Those things may dazzle the eyes, but they fade as quickly as the setting sun. Real value lies in the courage to stand tall when the world expects you to kneel, in the dignity of carrying your truth even when mocked, and in the refusal to let arrogance define your worth. A person wrapped in gold but empty in character is poorer than the one who serves bread with a proud heart. Power without humility becomes a prison, but humility with strength becomes freedom. Respect earned through force crumbles. Respect earned through integrity lasts for generations. True greatness is not about silencing others, but about lifting voices that are rarely heard. It is not about stepping on the weak, but about walking beside them. It is not about mocking talent, but about recognizing it, no matter where it comes from. When we define worth by money or titles, we reduce human beings to objects. But when we define worth by courage, compassion, and character, we awaken the divine spark that lives in every soul. Dignity cannot be bought. Self-respect cannot be stolen. And the strength to refuse humiliation is the richest inheritance a person can carry. So remember, when arrogance laughs, let your actions answer. When doubt surrounds you, let your fire shine brighter. And when power stands against you, never forget, the truest crown is the one worn in the heart.